welcome to Current Conditions. This is a podcast with me, Maggie Hittman, to discuss what is happening in the world and in ourselves and in the collective sphere. And I'll be exploring this question through the lenses that I'm familiar with, which are primarily Vedic astrology, Ayurveda, and a field called parapsychology, which investigates the individual's relationship with the places that they live, particularly the way the specific aspects of those places influence their psychology. But there will be other subjects we'll be going into as well, under the premise that probably the best way to navigate a difficult situation is to understand the influences that caused it, and the idea that we don't really know who we are or what we're doing or have any real sense of freedom if we're not aware of those same things that are pushing and pulling us, which are not always visible, and I think are, especially in perhaps the Western culture and mindset, not necessarily considered real. But those things have been a big part of my life, mostly because nothing made sense in my life before I started looking into the more non-visible influences. So that's the basic premise. I'll just talk for a minute about how I got here and who I am for those of you who don't know me. And then I would like to dissect the title itself, Current Conditions, because I chose that very specifically for specific reasons related to etymology and things like that I think can inform the way this goes. So I'm a Vedic astrologer. I'm connected to a living lineage. I've been studying and practicing since 2010. I bumped into Vedic astrology in 2009, and I do feel that it pretty much found me and then kind of blew my life open. But I'm from Wisconsin originally and came in with a fair amount of skepticism and was not really attracted to any of the so-called alternative sciences or arts or healing modalities. That was not in my radar. I was an athlete my whole life. I was running for UW-Madison, cross country and track. And so it was a very just kind of mechanical mindset that I was operating under until I went and lived in the woods for about 6 months straight out of college on a trail crew in the high Sierras. And that's when I started to understand that the life in the Midwest was not going to work for me and that there was a lot more out there. That is also where I started reading about parapsychology, which became the subject of my master's thesis. And that's a subject that helped me really understand why I felt so differently in the place that I came from, in the kind of flatlands, very stable lands of the Midwest versus where I eventually moved, which was Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah. And so I'll get a little bit more into that, or we'll definitely be getting more into that because I have an interview with the man who coined the term parapsychology, Craig Chalquist, which we've already recorded. So that's a subject we'll get more into in the context of this whole discussion, but that's just one element of my history. It was around the time after I worked in the trail crew, I moved to Utah to work in wilderness therapy for a little over a year. And that's where I found yoga and then very quickly astrology and Ayurveda. But it was really, I pursued yoga and I have my certifications for that, but it was really the astrology that caught me and kept me. So I've been studying that ever since, and that has helped me make a lot of sense of some of the more sort of subterranean influences to psychology, health, different experiences at different times, the sense of kind of fate that I had at certain points in my life, like these influences that I couldn't make sense of that felt largely at times familial and ancestral. I didn't have those words at that point in time, but now I understand where a lot of that was coming from. So that's a huge contextual factor, I would say, and one I'd like to explore more here. So we have kind of like the land and the place and the stars, which in most modern conceptions of health and even psychological health are not huge considerations, I would say, for the most part. But I feel that based on my experience with myself and with clients as well, that these are really significant factors to take into account for anyone who's trying to achieve health on any level. And the health at this point, my definition of health is probably not how most people would define it, or at least I'm not looking at the same factors in the achievement of that for sure your Western medicine person is, although I think that is that lens as well is an important component of this, and even I want to explore that in this podcast. But there's a much broader range of factors that have a bearing on even physical health. And I, in my life, have been forced to explore those, that nothing else was really working for me in terms of just addressing the body in a mechanical way. So I've been kind of thrust into this field of non-visible influences, not on purpose. And this was not my plan at all, but this is where I've found help. I think other people can find help here. And I think that it will be more and more important to consider these other factors now that there's this kind of global destabilization of business as usual, so to speak, and a lot of things are not working that once were. And I think that these will be the things that will help us through this time. So we have the place, we have the stars. Ayurveda is another big piece of my training and my experience, and that is in a way kind of like sitting somewhere between parapsychology and Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology and Ayurveda very much go together. They're sister sciences and they're best practice together, and that is how I use them. But Ayurveda is about the individual's relationship to their place in a way. And with the understanding that physical health is very much dependent on the factors in the local environment and how someone adapts to those factors. And you can't really have health without having a good relationship with your place in that way. So I like that lens as well. And I'll be getting more into that with different people. And I should say on pretty much all of these fronts, my perspective and approach to these studies is I have found not exactly the tagline approach. Like even with Ayurveda, I'm definitely integrating the fact that the study itself comes from an entirely different continent and landscape, and it needs to be modified in order to be relevant to people in other places and in a modern culture, and that we need to allow for innovation and things like that. So that will be part of the discussion going forward. Okay, so let's get into the title itself, which I thought about a lot in putting this together. And with the current conditions, broadly speaking, what I want to do is talk about what's actually happening. And with the understanding that there are many layers to even just what is happening in an individual in the present moment, in the cultural collective in the present moment, in the landscape, in nature, in the planets. There's like all these really significant and, like I said, not always visible or immediately discernible factors pressing in on us that I think are impacting us in ways we don't really appreciate. And if we did appreciate, would contain a lot of the answers for how to move forward. I think it would become much more obvious than this method of kind of, even in the realm of health, like trying to fix the problem really quickly without actually understanding what it is. I think that's a common common issue today. So I actually just want to spend some time getting into what is actually happening on a as deeply as possible. And like I said, with these different factors in mind, but I will bring more in that are also outside of the scope of my expertise. I do have already some interviews planned with colleagues and friends and experts in different fields that I'll be integrating, as well as talking more specifically about the things that I know, and also people that I've worked with and their experience with those, bringing those things into their life. But I see this as a sort of reckoning in a way with the gravity of the moment, because there is a huge amount of gravity, and I can see that from every lens that I have. I can see that from the Ayurvedic perspective and all of the things that are challenging personal health because of what's going on in the environment and in everyone's psychology. I can see that from the astrological lens and the transits that have been essentially ushering in a new epoch. And then with various experiences with specific places as well. So, yeah, and the word reckoning itself has this connotation of getting help. So and coming to terms with what is owed. I'm going to be getting more into etymology here, but I think there's something about sitting down and really looking at things that could be sort of medicinal for the moment. So that this is my attempt at that. So with the word current, initially I think of what is happening in the present time. So bringing it to the now. There's also connotations of what is generally accepted and what, like the current fashions, and what is exchanged as well when the word turns into currency. So there's quite a bit of interplay and agility, I would say, in this word. And the etymology is actually connected to transportation. It's a cart, wagons, chariots. I believe that eventually turns into car. So it's this medium of movement. And it's a movement that, especially when you get into the noun, where the like the current of a river, it's a type of immediacy and movement that moves you in a certain direction. And so that's kind of what I'm getting at with this interplay of forces that we may or may not be aware of that's actually pushing us in certain directions. And it might be nice to wake up to those directions on as many levels as possible. I can definitely see this in the context of astrology being essentially the study of time, and that current time being a medium essentially that we're carried inside of, with everyone having their own experience of time based on their specific karma and the elemental influences at play. But nonetheless, this very immediate and impactful push is something I think that's very important to look at. So that's the first half of the title. And the other thing I want to say about the currents and this, especially when we get into the noun definition, a tendency or course of events that is usually the result of an interplay of forces, is that when you're inside of the current, I think you're not necessarily aware of the various forces that are actually impacting you. So especially when we get into like the study of landscape and places and their impact, you see how deeply inside us these things actually are, where there comes a point where it's difficult to kind of distinguish what are your thoughts, what are the thoughts coming from the influences of place, what are the thoughts coming from the karma that you came in with, and the family forces that tend to push things in certain directions. So it's not, at a certain point, I think it becomes something that you can't necessarily keep at arm's distance, but you see is like really something that needs to be reckoned with. So then we get into condition, which as a noun has several definitions I think that are relevant here. The premise upon which the fulfillment of an agreement depends, something essential to the appearance of something else, and a restricting or modifying factor, as well as a state of being. And so these are, again, the things that precede the outcome of something. And it's a lot about agreements in this case, the conditions that allow something else to happen. My idea or observation is that I think there's a lot of these conditions that are unconscious in us and collectively, and again, in our various relationships to so many factors we're not even aware that we're in relationship to, that evaluating these can bring a lot more possibilities when it comes to what's next, because these conditions are continually kind of creating the next moment or the next year, and being aware of like the specifics of what those actually are, what we have agreed to individually and collectively, that is a very powerful tool to have. So when we take these two things together, and one other thing about the condition as a verb, conditioned or conditioning, to adapt, modify, or mold so as to conform to an environing culture, that also gets at the root of a lot of this, the idea that you can think of it almost on an elemental level, like we're a log in a river being slowly kind of, worn away or shaped in various ways according to the forces that are at play. Just like, we are an element of nature just like that. So understanding what is the conditioning in the present moment, what is the conditioning coming from the past. We can absolutely talk about this in terms of karma. We can talk about it in terms of the geology of the place that you live and the different fault lines and mountain ranges and historical dried up seabeds that I believe in my studies have suggested have actually all their own bearing on how you feel and think and behave, and how we do so collectively as well. So that's an important part of the condition piece. So taken together, what I essentially would like to do here is to explore that which we are currently inside of. So that's the current part, which we in some ways are, but our actions are determined by the particulars of that and the ways in which that is creating our future and the direction that we're moving in, the conditions that are here and are coming, and possibly in the exploration of that, things might make more sense, for one, and we might understand how to move forward as well, which would be an excellent thing, obviously. So areas of exploration, I'll definitely be getting more into the subject of astrology, more into parapsychology, basically any influence I see that impacts personal, collective, planetary health, especially the ones that are maybe not necessarily widely recognized. But I'd like it to be a genuine exploration. I know some things. I don't know some things. I have suspicions about things. I feel pretty certain that this is a very ripe moment for being really honest and trying to find a different way forward that allows for the health of, again, the human health, collective and cultural health, which is an enormous part of this. We need to know how to relate to each other. The health of the landscape. And it's very much the things that we are in relationship to that we maybe are conscious of and unconscious of. So I hope that you'll join me. I think it will be an interesting conversation, and I hope you'll stick around for the deeper layer conversations that can get us more situated in the current conditions, and we'll just see where that takes us.